Hey Sidhu, hey Srinath, welcome back to our podcast. Today, at least what we were thinking is we'll discuss about how do you guys identify the customer needs. What I'm thinking is let's start with like very quick round of introductions. I know we have done this in the past, but let's start with a very quick round of introductions, and we'll go from there. I'll start with mine. Hi everyone, this is Phani. I'm a senior product manager at Intuit. I manage a couple of platform products which are used by all the products within Intuit. So do you want to go next?
Yeah, so it's Saladi here. I work for Best Buy as a product manager, and I'm basically building products to accelerate the zero to one process, which is idea to product launch at Best Buy. Srinath.
Awesome.
Yep. Thanks, guys. So this is Srinath. I'm the Senior Product Operations Manager for Twilio Centred. I support the Centred email API from product operations standpoint. So with that being said, I'll kick it off to Funny.
Awesome. Let's get started. Srinath, maybe let me start with you. So tell me a little bit about the product that you're driving and how do you identify the customer needs?
The product that I drive is Centred, which is an email API that we that like marketers or developers use to send communications to customers. So that's the product that I support. From customer pain point identification standpoint, there are various resources that we look at. One of our key resources is like working with our customer facing teams, which includes the sales, professional services, customer support. All these teams capture the customer pain points as well as the feedback from them because those are our front face. Based on the conversations they capture in a Salesforce tool, where like verbatims, this customer satisfaction scores, the NPS, such as those. So through that, we mine the data and capture top themes and influence that to influence our roadmap. So that is one avenue. And the other avenue that we also look at is the customer satisfaction scores that our customer experience team runs on a daily basis. This they capture through websites, through surveys that they send to the customers through email. So this as well, we capture various verbatims from here, develop themes, and capture that. So yeah, long story short, the number
Actually,
of
Srinath, let me ask you another question, right? So yours is an, let's say, email marketing tool. Okay.
Mhm.
So if I understand the product right, or just to make sure everyone understands it right, um, basically you're developing products that are being used by another business. So
Yes.
is your customer a marketing team who's sending emails to the customer, or is your customer a developer who's basically using your product to build something on top of it?
So it's both. So marketers use our tools in like crafting templates and putting like figuring out whom to send to, like based on our logics and all that stuff. And the builders, they use more around APIs to integrate within their services, applications. For instance, if a software developer wants to enable a chat application within their website or within their tool, they use our APIs in order to build that application. Whereas marketer wouldn't need that. Marketer would need more around self-service templates. How do they send it? Very easy to customers.
Awesome, that's great. Let's get some thoughts from Sidhu as well. Sidhu, if I understand your product right, you're a product manager for an organization that accelerates the entire Best Buy in getting the products faster. So who is your customer and how do you try to capture their needs?
Yeah, that's right. So I'd say all the engineering teams are, my customers. So that's who we interact on a daily basis. But at a fundamental level, right? I'd say discovery is a process which we do continuously, where we tend to get feedback on a regular basis to all of these users of the products around Best Buy. And also, when I say, right, discovery process, there are multiple layers to it, right? So as we can say, you could do it through interviews, so that's one way of doing it. And you could do it through observing people on how they use the product, right? So either that could be you looking at Google Analytics to see what pages they browse through, where do they stop, how much time they spend at, all of that stuff. So that's the customer journey. So that's one way of looking at it. And also, you can actually get to a focus group of people who are, much well aware of your product, and kind of get much detailed feedback to that. So I'd say these three are different mechanisms which we use to get feedback at a core level. And then comes the next step of processing this data. So you'll have a plethora of pain points and user needs and all of that stuff from all of these engineering teams. Then you actually look at all of these problems, trying to categorize them into different problem themes. That's when you try to understand what is the biggest problem theme we can solve, and add value to the users. That's when I start the next process, where you dig deep into what the pain points are, because I feel that getting pain points is one way of looking at it, but if you don't dig deep enough, you might not understand the problem or the actual root of the problem in a much detailed way. So that then comes the next phase of digging deep and defining what the problem is. That's where you get into then prioritizing and solving the problem.
That's a very interesting thought. Even at Intuit, right? So I'll add a couple of things, and then let's deep dive into that. So even at Intuit, what I typically do is, since I'm a platform product manager, I have two types of customers as well. One is internal developers, and the second customers that I also look at is the end customers. So I try to capture both the needs from the internal customers, like let's say the platform which is being used by the developers, and also the needs of the end customer, so they can use our Intuit products, like let's say QuickBooks and Mint and others. So let's go a little bit more deeper into this, right? So when you try to talk to these customers, how do you capture these needs? If there is any specific tools that you guys use, maybe we can do that too. Sid, why don't you start on this one?
Yeah, sure. So as I said, right, these are different modes of getting your feedback, right? Like interviews is one way of doing it. Observing people is another way, and also maybe getting it focus groups another way. But you use different frameworks to actually get these user needs from people. Um, Inside these different types of things what you have, right? So what I would say is, when you look at different frameworks, I'd say there's no one size fit all for all of these things. So it basically depends on what you want to do. So let's maybe take an example of, you are doing something from scratch, right? So you're building something completely new. So that's then how do you get basically get the pain points from the users? I'd say the best way to do that is try to understand what the user journey is, right? Like from the point where the person starts to do a job to the point he completes the job. Try to see what are the frictions between different stages, pain points, and all of these stages. And once you actually have an idea of what all these are, I think that's when you basically create a discussion guide around to ask these focused questions to these customers. And also, the way which I do it is not asking people direct questions of, okay, what's the problem? What is the biggest thing you want? Right? You actually ask questions around them and identify the frustrations and also pains which these people have. Because there could be things where you could ask, like, okay, uh, in your day job, right, what is the biggest pain point you might have, right? Or when you're using this tool, how do you do it, right? So having these conversations will help you understand like the frustrations and also depth of the problem and what these people are having. So that's one way of doing it. So again, going through the customer journey map, and then having a discussion guide, digging through that will give you a lot set of problems. And also, I would say is, right, once you have these problems, you can actually do an empathy map. When you get into the empathy map, you can say that you can divide things on what the person says, what the person thinks, what the person does, what the person feels. So that will actually help you understand the pain points much better. And I think also, when you say when you capture the feelings of the person, that will basically help you understand the core problem in a much better way than what he thinks. Because I might think that this is my problem, but what I feel might be a different problem. So,
Got it.
that's something which I try
Correct.
to do. So this is just a quick example of one framework which I use. But yeah, we can dig deep
That
as we go.
that's actually very nice. Yeah, even I see that in my work. So even at Intuit, right, there is a principle that we follow called "Follow Me Home." So what we basically do is we go to a customer, we give them a problem to say, hey, let's say you want to send money to your vendors. How would you do that? How would you use QuickBooks to do it? Or if you're not using QuickBooks, what are the tools you use and how do you do that? All we basically do for another next 20 minutes or so is observe what the customer does. We don't ask any questions. We just literally sit and note down what the customer does. After that, we go to that customer and ask those questions to say, hey, how do you feel about this step? How do you feel about that step? And exactly like what you said, we observe the person. We observe how they feel, because they might just be like, okay, this is the way to do it. I'm going to do it. But you will see their expression to see, dude, that person is frustrated.
Yeah, that's right.
I haven't tried the emotion map, but I'll try
Yeah,
it as well.
So
that's
Srinath,
pretty
maybe
what do you think?
interesting.
maybe
No,
just
I'm
to add one
good.
point on your
Go ahead.
what you said, Funny. So to give you an example, right? So let's assume that I'm a customer, right? My need is that I have to open a garage door. But as a PM, I come up with a solution where I have a garage, opener with a remote and all of that stuff. The customer might not be interested. He might just want a lever to lift the door, right? So I think that's when you dig deep into this empathy mapping, you try to understand the emotions and how does he feel, what he thinks, what he says, and all of that stuff. Just a small example.
Makes sense.
Yeah. No,
Srinath, how do you do it
empathy.
at Twilio?
Now, first, just before that, like I think I really like the empathy mapping. I never did that honestly. Looks like it's very interesting. So from my side, so we used a couple of tools in the past. One we used called Envision, which was more to like share that, give a heads up to customers, walk through that and get feedback live. So that was one thing which we did. And also we did under the usability study, like more around what you said, like where we just give this like the website and that feature and ask customers to play, and it's all recorded. We don't observe, but we, because customers sometimes may feel that, oh, someone is observing, we don't even tell them. So we just give, and that's recorded, and we observe later on. Once we observe, we talk to customers. So very similar to what you said, just executing in a different way. And in my previous company, we did another method, which was we organized a business summit where we invited a representative who basically is our persona of our product. So we invited those around 10 personas from, like, sorry, 10 people from different companies who are our real customers who use our product. And we created kind of a focus group that Sid touched earlier. So we did a little open-ended, try to understand their pain points, problems that we're trying to solve, and all that stuff. So those were pretty helpful. So in currently in our company, we're trying to build out a lot of these frameworks. We are just trying to build up the team.
Nice. Let me ask this way. So all of us are product managers here, and we for sure are doing a lot of interviews and stuff. There's several, in my opinion, there are several steps involved, right? It might not be as simple as find a random customer and do an interview. Do you do any kind of research, or do you work with any kind of research teams in order to identify these customers, like define what kinds of questions you need to ask to these customers and do the interview? Maybe I'll start with Srinath this time.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So not in my current company. In my previous company, we did that way. As I said, in my current company, we are trying to build a research team. So in our previous company, when we stated what exactly the problem statement that we are trying to solve and all that stuff, we worked with engineering in kind of defining that research scope. for one of the key feature that we launched in Europe. It was a pretty complex, which we knew that will create customer friction. So we worked closely with the the research in doing that with the customers. So yes, we did that in previous. Um, did I miss anything else? I think.
In that part, like, how do you identify these customers? Like, is there any
Oh yeah,
specific tools?
yeah. So that's a good question. So that's something which I missed. So we closely partner with our sales and professional services teams who are kind of generating leads for us. So they have a pretty good customer base, and they tag kind of the deal, like the deal breakers, the deal challenges where there may be a deal opportunities. So we know that why we know from them, like some of the customers who were looking for that specific feature. So we identify with the help of them and create that list and start working with them. So we partnered closely with our sales and professional services.
That's great. Yeah, even I did that to a certain extent in Intuit too. Even Intuit, we have a bunch of tools where we bring the small business owners because our QuickBooks is primarily focused on them, or even the individual customers, and we even incentivize them if they can come and spend time with us. And many a times, what we also do is we build prototypes, and since we have an org that can help us get these customers, we take the prototypes to those customers and ask them to like review it. Hey, just play with it and then see how you feel. Many a times we'll be able to get like the honest feedback from them because they know why we are doing this.
Yep.
And Sidhu, have you done this in the past? I know you worked with both the startups and the big companies, right? Maybe you can elaborate on that difference too, like having a
Yeah,
big organization org that can help you versus you doing it.
yeah, that's right. So I think it's pretty different at different organizations, right? As you know, there could be some organizations where you have everything ready and you have to kind of grab that and start working with people. There are organizations or startups where you have to build something from ground up. So I can give you an example where I was working for this startup here, right? Like Global Traffic Technologies. So I think the first thing was my challenge as a product manager was to build a product outside our core product. So our core
Okay.
product was preemption. Preemption is whenever an ambulance emergency vehicle goes through a light, you basically can switch that to green, right? How awesome it is, right? So it's basically helping people save lives, and cops chase people, catch people, and all of that stuff. So that's what we do. But the main goal was to create something outside the core product because this was we already had 70% market share and not generating much revenue there. So I think the point where I had to start was defining what the persona is. I think this is a pretty important topic as product manager because we start from the customer, right? So that's where we go back to understand what the customer is. So there were several personas which I could look at in the city level space, right? So there are traffic managers, there are police chiefs, there are fire chiefs, there are transit managers, there are smart city managers. All of these are different personas which I could basically talk to and get some feedback on. So then once we have the set of personas, then you basically try to pick one or two personas who are the decision makers are or the people who are actually using the product, right? So who we want to build the product for and solve for. So maybe let's take an example where I have a fire chief, which I'm building a product for. And the problem which these guys have is they have to work with 7 to 8 different applications to get to a point where they receive a call regarding a fire incident, to the point they dispatch, to the point they come back and note down. So there's a lot of different softwares which they use. None of these talk to each other. There's no data visibility and all of that stuff. So that's the kind of problem which we're trying to solve. So the next thing what I had to do is basically reach out to all these people, go search all the city websites, figure out all the fire chiefs, send them emails. And the other
Oh
problem
wow.
we had was we couldn't actually incentivize people because these are government agencies and they cannot actually take money to do all of this stuff. So then gathering a list of like 100, 120, sending out cold emails, and there are also other sources where we can get this information from. So that's where we reached out, and there was a response rate about around 1%. So I was able to collect 26 contacts and set up interviews, talk to them regarding their pain points. And again, right, the questions I ask go back to the user journey, which I was talking about, and the frictions in their user journey, all of that stuff. Ask them questions, and then you basically collect all the pain points. And once you define what it is, then again you go back to them and reiterate on all of those things.
Got it.
So that's one
Nice.
way to do it. Yeah.
That's pretty
Okay,
interesting.
go ahead.
And
Go ahead.
one of the things I think, I mean, I learned this after joining Twilio. Kind of some of the customer data platforms that can really help in understanding customers. So these, like one of the Twilio's product is Segment, which is a customer data platform, which tries to understand the user behavior, customers, and a lot of these, like especially the business customers, want to use a platform like CDP to understand who is their customer, where are they in the customer journey. Like for instance, if Amazon is using a Segment CDP, they will know who has put an item in the cart, and once they know that, they will talk to like they'll reach out to customers with the next step. Even in this case, like understanding, Amazon can easily understand the user behavior, how they were interacting with website, and accordingly target those people when they want to do any pilots and all that stuff.
That's very interesting. Actually, I would love to understand more there, right? So here there is two different aspects. The first one we are talking about is us trying to like reach out to the customers, doing interviews, focus groups, etc., to capture the needs. There is another, I don't know if it's a better way or not, looking at their data. So maybe Srinath, I'll start with you. Amazon, based on what I know, has like what trillions and trillions of customer data. So how do you utilize the data to understand the customer needs?
Yeah, like you said, there is a tons of data, and the way we utilize is we capture a lot of this feedback through customer satisfaction surveys or through phone calls to customer support. So those calls, I mean, as you guys know, those all those calls are recorded. I think which all these folks tell customers on the call when they're talking. So that is all recorded. Once that is done, so those are all stored in a database, and where we do a lot of text mining, sentiment analysis to understand what customers are feeling about our specific products, and not only just product, like along the customer journey. I mean, where the friction and pains are. It definitely there's a lot of manual overhead involved, but there's a lot of text mining and sentiment analysis which happens behind, and which helps at the end to capture these top themes, as well as the customer positive response rate or negative response rate. That way, as a PM, we can understand where the opportunities are.
Yeah. So
Have you
yeah.
go ahead, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. So one follow-up question. I was. It's always. I'm always curious how to basically debrief all this information, because it's a very manual process and very tedious process, right? Customer feedback and all of that stuff. Like, do you use any proprietary tools, or are there any tools outside that makes it easy for you guys to do it? Because the way which I used to do in the startup was basically me looking at that stuff. So in the interviews we had note taker where who takes all the notes, but end of the day it was going through 35 plus interviews, understanding them, categorizing. So it's a lot of tedious work that happens around it. So just want to understand.
Yeah, no,
I
that's
can
a good question. Good.
go ahead, Srinath.
Right. No, I'll keep it short. So in Amazon, there was a tool called Heartbeat, which is all internal. A tool. Everything is Amazon doesn't usually source much from outside, so it's an internal tool which does a lot of this text mining, sentiment analysis, and helps capture that. But there is still a lot of manual overhead because you're with thousands of verbatims. You need to make sure you have proper filters, keywords to make sure you get the feedback that you wanted. Otherwise, there'll be a lot of noise, and sometimes it may go in a different direction if you don't do the right filtering. Sorry, go ahead, Phani.
No, that's great. I love the name of the product, Heartbeat. Basically, getting the heartbeat of the customers, I guess. Yeah.
Exactly.
even at Intuit, we do a lot of that. So we have wealth of data. Trust me, like with Mint as a product, with QuickBooks as a product, right? We have trillions and trillions of transactions from our customers. So if Sid went on a trip and he spent $1,000 somewhere, I'll be able to deduce that through his transactions. I have his flight tickets, I have his expenses at a hotel, I have his expenses at a restaurant. I'll literally be able to like put a map of what Sid did throughout his trip. We have wealth of data that we could utilize, but we don't have use cases at the moment where we can utilize that.
Well,
And what we are
yeah.
trying to do is, I'll just add this thing and then I'll go to your Sid. So what we are trying to do is we want to give a personalized experience for the customer. So based on all of this data, the first and the one of the things that we did recently was, can I identify what are all the financial institutions that Sid or Srinath uses without them even telling us? That way, we can save time for Sid or Srinath so that they can come to Mint easily and connect all of them. We want to extend on all of that and identify what are the different major events that are happening in Srinath's life. Let's say, imagine this extremely happy path scenario, right? You come to TurboTax and you are able to file your taxes in 10 minutes. That would be amazing. A lot of that can be achieved through personalization. Even though we have this data, but it requires a lot of cleanup, a lot of manual analysis at the moment. But we hope to be at a situation where we can like cruise through it and make insights without us putting any manual effort. Sid, go ahead. I have a question.
Yeah, sorry. I'll add a comment to yours and then get back to what I was saying. So I think that's a really interesting thing because now in Mint, what I see is it shows me suggestions of institutions or banks which I'm tied to, but I haven't linked in it. So that's
Yep.
actually it. It takes out the pressure of me remembering what I have to add, and it suggests me. So that's a really good feature there. So yeah, good. So one other question, right? So there's a lot of data here and all of that stuff, and I'd say for PMs data is like the wealth of decision making and prioritizing and all of that stuff. So how educated are PMs at these organizations to make use of this data? Are they actively using this data, or is that a resource that is available to all the PMs, or how does that all of that work?
I can start. So we have a product called Customer 360. The way that platform is organized is anything that we identify for a customer, we try to store it in that platform. That's basically a centralized database for all the customers' data. That helps a lot because uh, a product manager in TurboTax might be capturing certain data for a customer, and the same customer might be coming and using Mint. Having that data available from TurboTax might be useful for us to use it in Mint. Again, the footnote there is only after the customer gives us the consent, we'll be utilizing the data from product to product. But we have that centralized database that can be utilized. But going back to your question, said like how knowledgeable are the PMs about these entire data? Not as much as what I would say, because unless and until you go beyond your current work and then like try to explore that, only then you will be able to like know all these things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a really good point. And the reason why I asked this question is also even at the organizations which I've worked, there exists data, but it also, there is a lot of research and finding and, asking around to know that this data source exists and we can make use of that. Right?
And that's one of the challenges that I'm trying to solve within our product team as well. So we there's so much data around there, but it's not usable, not actionable for our product to influence our roadmap. So that is something which I'm trying to solve through the customer feedback loop program that I think I spoke to you guys earlier. So what are the different tools that we leverage? How we get that feedback in a submitted from all these customer facing teams so it's consumable, and how we create accountability between all these teams in using that data by setting clear expectations, as well as creating a win-win situation for both, because product needs that access to influence a roadmap. GTM needs product feedback to inform customers. I mean, we want to make sure their voice is heard as well, because they are talking to customers, and customers are really interested in knowing, oh, when do you plan to launch this, when do you plan to launch that. So creating this complete loop and getting access to that is important.
Yeah, imagine a product which is like a Google search for your company, where you try to search and get all the data. Not confidence, for sure.
There is another interesting idea that we were exploring as well. Like, how can we utilize the data that Intuit has that can benefit the small business, or that can benefit the individual consumers, right? Okay, let me ask this question to you. There is there's a lot of changes that are going in the world right now. Tell me, what is the crypto that's still being used by customers, even though the crypto market is still down? Or maybe because of, let's say, one tweet that happened yesterday. Let's say Tesla sold $900 million of Dogecoin yesterday. How did it impact the actual sales of Dogecoin? Would you know? But with the data that we have, we might be able to tell within our customer base how is the trend performing. Do you think that data will be useful? The real-time data about how customers are utilizing or how customers' perception is changing about something with the actual transaction data.
Yeah,
That'd be really
I don't know
interesting.
how. Now that's pretty interesting. Yeah, because there can be so much bias, or because there are one or two key decisions. If it's creating so many fluctuations, I don't know how we can make any coincidences or correlations. It's like, usually I feel the data is useful only when, I mean, correlations are good, but it should make sense. So if it's not making sense, then it's hard to understand the root cause why something is happening. Makes sense.
Nice. This is an awesome conversation. I loved it. Anything else? Any final closing thoughts from you guys?
So one, little curious, right? Like, were there any instances in your user research where you initially thought this was the problem, and then maybe had to change that because you haven't done enough?
Good question.
Maybe I can
I've
start if you
seen.
want to give me an example, but yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I thought this would be really interesting. This was a learning for me, right? So as I said, I was talking to all of these fire chiefs, police chiefs, and all of that stuff. And one of the pain point which kept on coming was people didn't have dashboards to track a lot of metrics that these traffic and vehicles did. So they were basically spending manual time where two people were sitting, crunching the data, putting things together, and all of that stuff. So these people wanted the specific dashboard with a set of metrics. So that was a pain point. I was like, okay, I got something, and I was very excited. And then basically we did solutioning, we did prototypes, and went back to the customer. After going back to the customer, uh, when I talked to people, right, like people were like, we had acceptance ratio, right? We did NPS scores and all of that stuff, and the score came out very low. What I figured out was, in the second set of interviews, were people wanted a dashboard, but people wanted a customizable dashboard because every metric changed based on the goals of the departments. And the first sample of departments which I talked to had similar metrics which they wanted to track, but the second sample wanted a different set of metrics. So I think that's an example of not digging deep enough, because if I would have built a product, people would have not actually bought the subscription.
Got it.
That's a good
Yeah,
point.
I've seen that as well to a certain extent. So the personalization one that we were talking about, right? So I was the PM who was driving that to say, like, can I utilize transactions data to identify the providers that SID has? So let's say if Sid connects Chase, then we'll go through his transactions to see what else he has. Maybe he's paying his insurance through Geico. Maybe he's using PG&E as his electricity provider. So once we identify these providers, we show it on the widget. Our initial hypothesis is that we should be able to utilize customers' transactions data. We should be able to utilize probably their credit report if we have it, or we can also utilize any kind of like other products that they're using to capture that. The funny part was when we spoke to the customers, they're like, hey, it's really useful. Okay, we've created first prototype, and then we went to the customers once again. I asked my research team to say, hey, let's take this, go back and figure out what the customers are thinking. They're like, there is mixed opinions always. A lot of customers were like, dude, this is awesome. I can remember, I don't have to like put thought in like adding more providers. The other people were like, dude, how did you figure out all of this stuff? Like, how did you know this stuff about me? So there is that fear from the customers to say, dude, am I sharing too much data with someone? So we had to go back, think through all those things. All we want to make sure is make the life easy for the customer, but in that journey, we shouldn't lose that customer, or we shouldn't cause additional fear for the customer. So we made sure to give additional context to say, hey, this is from your transactions, this is from your TurboTax use, this is from your credit reports, etc. So that customers clearly understand that, okay, these guys are not randomly getting some data, but this is more from the data that I already gave them.
Yeah, I think
That makes sense.
sometimes empathy mapping is what helped me in some of these things. So as we were, we had this topic before, right? I was thinking through the different things which people might think of or feel of and all of that stuff. And maybe to give you an example, right? We say when we do empathy mapping, we capture what people say, what people think, what people do, what people feel, right? So let's say maybe assume a person looking at a website, right? He might say that, okay, I want something reliable. He might not feel that the website is authentic, right? But that's what the user need is, right? He'll say, he doesn't basically tell you how it should be, but this is what he says he feels, right? And the other thing is things like what he might think. He'll basically look at the website and says, okay, this is very annoying, I cannot click the button on the top, it's very small. So that's one way of doing it. And the next one is what he does, right? Person while using it, he refreshes the page multiple times to see what comes up. So that's an action which we can learn from. And also what he feels, right? The page loads very slowly. This is what the customer might not tell you, but this is what he feels when he's waiting and frustrated. So these are some ways actually help me basically navigate some of these nuances.
I
So
also
it's say,
have an
think, do, and feel.
Yeah, say,
yeah.
think, do, feel.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. I have a slightly different question. Since we talked about like gathering requirements and all that stuff, I want to get you guys' perspective. So I know when we trying to solve problem, we gather data through multiple sources. I'm sure you guys will be working with customer facing teams, right? How do you guys make sure their voice is heard? Because customer face, I mean, obviously when you go to them, you need help from them. They would only help if their voice is heard. I mean, maybe once or twice they'll help. Maybe third time, oh, okay. If their voice is not heard, maybe they'll not show interest. That can impact the overall problem that we're trying to solve. What are the different ways that you guys do to make sure their voice is heard? I mean, I know we can say we can pull them into roadmap conversations. We can communicate the changes and all that stuff. But I'm just curious to get your thoughts.
So this is when you basically say their voice is heard, you're basically talking about the customer success organization's voice is heard to you or to the development teams and stuff. I can add a couple of things. So at Intuit, right, as one of the biggest things that product managers try to do is customer obsession. So the customer obsession, as product managers, we have it within our heart. We go to customers, or we talk to all these teams on a daily basis or weekly basis. What we do is we bring these teams and host sessions with engineers. It's an open session that's hosted by a product manager every month for an hour. And these sessions could be coming from a actual representative, and we play customer calls. The representatives, the customer success representatives come, play actual customer calls to our engineers. Or we take customer chats and we give it to our engineers, ask them to like read through those chats. And the customer success representatives host these sessions. Or we also use a tool called Decibel. Decibel basically helps us track what exactly the customer is doing on the website. Like how is their mouse moving, what are the kinds of things that they're clicking, etc., etc. So with that, we'll also be able to see how the customer is feeling. So we have those videos. So the customer success team comes and shares all of the data and asks the engineers to like go through them. So engineers' customer empathy will increase. And at the same time, we are actually bringing the customer success teams to host those sessions. So it's a win-win situation for both of them, where the engineers get the thought process of the customer, and at the same time, the customer success teams share their knowledge, share their feedback of what they're capturing from the customer. That's one thing we
Got it.
do.
That's very interesting. Yeah, that is similar. One practice we did in my previous company that was pretty helpful. Yeah, we need to think about how we could do it here.
Yeah, so
It's a
maybe
good
my
point.
thoughts, Srinath, based on the question you asked, right? So uh, there were instances where I used to go to these customers, voice heard, right? So the first interview is like full flashy, they're very enthusiastic, they give us a lot of problems and all of that stuff. Second interview, they're okay, okay. And the third interview where they start asking, okay, we have talked about a lot of these things, and I'm talking about the same things again and again.
Exactly.
So I think that happens a lot because we might have like 1,000 different problems which we could solve, but we need to focus on like top 2 or 3 problems which add the value, and we have our metrics and all of that stuff. But I think always what helped me is to be transparent and give them what we have done from the last interview. So these were all the things which we have identified. This is what we have solved, and this is what the areas we are looking into, and this is where you can help. So that helped me sometimes, and obviously there are sometimes where people are a little frustrated when they have to answer the same question or repeat the same question, and all of that happens. And also to the another point where engineers need to be involved. So one practice which I've done is I've invited the complete team to all of the customer interviews. So irrespective of them coming or not, so it basically stays in their calendar and they can come and sit and watch basically. So that's one way where people came in and they know what the customer is, and they are actually basically also owning to the problems with the customers, not just the product managers. And also sometimes there were instances where we had engineers or engineering managers as note takers. So that's also when they're actually also part of the solutioning and also the part of the discovery process. So that's also one way which actually helped me. But these are small examples, and there's a long way to go for sure.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that alignment and transparency between the teams is important because you may have only limited bandwidth. It's about just how you communicate that, how you plan to prioritize, why you plan to prioritize this over something, and bring all the people along with you. No, that makes sense. Yep. Thanks for your thoughts.
Actually, I want to add one more thing on that. The voice being heard, right? It's applicable to both customers and the internal customer success
All,
organizations as well.
everyone.
So we also do that too. So for example, if a customer comes to Mint and they give it, we capture a lot of feedback from the customers. They can come and say, dude, I want to connect to this provider. This provider is not working. I want to capture this data. I want to capture that data, etc. We gather all of this feedback. One thing we do a really good job of is based on the recurrence of that feedback, we continue to like support that. But one thing we also should do is going back to that customer to say, dude, we heard you and we did this. That would definitely encourage the customers to come back to us and give more feedback. That's one thing we are also planning to work on in the future.
Yeah, and also I
Yeah.
need to add, uh, we have had customer office hours. So this is where we basically, it's an optional thing where people can drop in if they want to listen what we have done with their feedback. So that's a way where people who are actually really contributing to in the interviews, right? And spending their time could see what the progress they've made. So that's one way of seeing, giving back the information of what the progress is and what we have done with their feedback.
Makes sense.
Yeah, no,
Yeah, man, really,
definitely.
really good discussion.
Yeah, because here there are two people who are giving feedback, right? Right. Well, one is a real customer who's giving feedback, and customer facing teams, all these different teams who are kind of sharing that voice of the customer. So it's like, yeah, we need to make sure both voices heard. If not, yeah, probably we won't get the data that we need.
And also an interesting take, in my previous company, there was also the sales voice where sales was coming to us saying, okay, if we have to get this deal done, you have to actually implement this feature. So that's also pretty, because you have to then, like, are you customer obsessed or revenue? When you're a startup, revenue is very important. Otherwise, you have to keep your vote, right? So that's also
Yeah,
a difficult conversation which you have to have.
yeah. To your earlier point, that's one thing which I'm also trying to build. Kind of how do we build a prioritization framework which creates transparency by taking both qualitative and quantitative factors. So we're not just going by numbers and effort, because if you take effort, then you cannot do anything. Then you'll say, oh, this takes 50 weeks, we cannot do anything. Whether if you consider like both qualitative, whether okay, is this a deal breaker, is this a deal challenge, or is this just a nice to have, or and also taking from business standpoint how that would help as well. I mean, sometimes it may be like it's okay, you may not make money, but that may be a big deal that you need. So
And especially sometimes when you work with government, you have RFPs which you have to fulfill. Otherwise, you will actually get sued. So that will become the most important priority than the customer sometimes.
exactly.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Love the conversation, guys. Thank you so much for your time. Enjoyed all of the feedback, enjoyed all of the conversations.
Okay. Perfect.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks
Thanks, Phani.
everyone.
And I think let's talk again next week on a different topic.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thanks.